Remo, you are ready?
Yeah, the recording is running.
Okay, great. So, hello everybody. Welcome to our session this Thursday. As you all know, we decided to talk about how do I assess my personal, my local context, and I thought this would be a good topic to talk about because very often I see people want to do something on their land or in their situation and ask for help. And then it seems to be an awkward process. Sometimes people reply very quickly with some or other answers. And sometimes I think people are not really happy with any replies that are coming. And we often jump into an activity, do something to move forward. And I think it would be wise to talk about that and why we should first really spend some time observing our situation, assessing our situation, and then take it from there with a little bit more of an understanding, or quite a bit more of an understanding of where we are and what we can do now and where we or what our goals are, where we want to see ourselves or want to be, and how we can get there. I don't want this to be a monologue. I've asked Wiebke to join this call, and there are other people on this call. So please ask questions if you don't understand. There might be some words that are very unfamiliar. But maybe I'll just start with what you can see on your screen right now, as I think this is a very important tool to start your assessment process. And maybe then we'll just open it up and take it a bit more casual as we go. So, so what you see here is the scale of permanence, which was created by a chap called P.A. Yeomans, who lived in Australia a while ago. And he wrote quite a few books that are very relevant for this process and for really creating a farm that is becoming more and more resilient. So please look into his books if you have the time to read. So the scale of permanence is a simple tool that helps us look at everything that influences our space. So this starts in this case with a red color on the outside. So these are the most permanent, as you can see on the right, most permanent features that are the most difficult or impossible for us to influence. And it then zooms in to the least permanent and for us most easy or possible to influence. And there are many versions of this. If you go online and search for the scale of permanence, you will see that people make their own versions, and I would ask you to try it out for yourself as well. You might add something here or there or remove something. So we obviously start with the big ones. We look at your climate, and then we go down that ladder. And the reason why we do that is because it really sets the tone. Yeah? So the things we cannot change give us a condition that we have to work with now. And the further we move down towards number one in the middle, or down in the bottom, the green one, we have the possibility to influence those and my thought there. and even if we have to change it more often, that is easy with those. But the bigger ones, that's where we want to be really careful, or we cannot influence those. Yeah. So
influence them, but we must know them intimately, and I think that's the important thing.
Exactly.
We must get to know
them.
Please
add something. Hello?
Yeah, Stefan, carry on.
Okay, so yes, like Wiebke says, so we really have to get intimate with them. That's a nice word. And that gives us confidence to understand our situation better, and with that make better long-term decisions, especially with these hard to influence or impossible to influence. Yeah, I don't know if should we go a bit more into detail of the individual elements?
Yes, I think
we
Stefan,
have a
maybe
bit of time.
Maybe you can give us
Just as an example,
also some
maybe?
concrete examples.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. So, so climate. I don't need to talk much about that because I think we all understand our climate a little bit, but there's a lot more we can get to know if we really pay closer attention. What I want to say though is we also, most of us, or all of us, aware that our climates are also changing. So the patterns of the climate has changed and will be changing. And we can use this tool to also develop that, becoming more aware and becoming, in a sense, more resilient towards those fluctuations. Okay, so the second one is water. Sorry, land.
Can I say something to the climate, please?
Sure, go. Yes.
And this is something that I find very useful that I borrow or I use from holistic management is the so-called brittleness scale. And that's another scale, but that's more on a linear basis. So brittleness means anything that can snap. You know, if you have a twig and you break it and you hear it, that means it's brittle. So wherever we have a landscape or an environment where over a longer period during the year, most plant matter becomes brittle, that is so dry that it snaps, at least the above ground part, we call that brittle. So we have very brittle landscapes, which is a true desert. And then it gradually changes to the other extreme, which is a rainforest, where everything is soft and succulent all year round. And, you know, it never gets to that snappy point. When it decomposes, it actually is decomposed by microbiology and by insects alive, kind of thing, or at least in a soft, moist state. So knowing where on the brittleness scale we are climate-wise is really useful, because how carbon cycles, how the decomposition process happens is very much determined by how much moisture there is in the ground or on the ground surface and available for growth. So where we know for a fact that when you are on the high on the brittleness scale, that means very dry, bare soil fairly never covers up again. Once it's bare, it's really difficult to get covered again. Whereas in a more moist environment, just imagine Europe. If you've been to Germany or if you've been to Europe, you see that a roof will cover over in moss in like 2 or 3 years' time. It's a bare shingle of burnt fire clay, and it will cover up with plant material. So bare surfaces cover up in low brittleness, whereas bare surfaces in very brittle environments usually decline even faster. And it needs some interruption, it needs some disturbance to let seeds germinate there again, to let water infiltrate. In the moist environments, in the low brittleness environments, rest is going to restore plant growth. But it's not the same in our climate. Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Or a question.
I think it's important to note that if rest is not the answer, then it needs hard work. So it needs
not smart work, Imo. Smart work.
Necessary.
And at the right time.
Yes, obviously, but it needs work. It's not happening on its own.
It needs disturbance. It needs invigoration. It needs fertilization. It needs cooperation with other organisms. That's why the grazing of livestock is so useful in the brittle environments. Over these vast areas, the livestock can break down the brittle plant pods in the dry season and lay them down as mulch. So whether we call that hard work or not, if we guide our livestock to do this job, depends. But somehow that stuff needs to happen. And if the big animals are not doing it, the insects will do it. And that's why the termites are doing it. In brittle environments, termites cycle or are very important in cycling carbon back into the soil. Plus aided by other ants and insects.
So the living organisms are also loosening and breaking up not just the organic material but also the soil. So if your soil is capped because of poor management, the livestock can actually break the cap and give it a possibility for a seed to actually be held in that place. And yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in next number 9. You want to still add something, Wiebke?
No.
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 So I like that scale of brittleness, and I think this goes for anywhere in Namibia. Anywhere in Namibia we are in a brittle landscape, even by the river. So maybe this should sink in deeply and keep this in mind, that we have a very brittle landscape, which very quickly can be turned into a desperate situation if we do the wrong thing. Okay, so we move on to the next, landform. I think this is a really interesting one. I really like this one. We have very diverse landform and geology in Namibia. Beautiful, very interesting, very diverse. Wherever you go in the country, it kind of changes. It's also something, the more you take the time to actually look at it, sit somewhere and really observe the landscape, you start to see patterns that reoccur. So that's also something that can teach you a lot about how does water flow, how does wind or heat get deflected or diverted. And we can play a lot with landscape, especially if it is not flat. Very often in agriculture, for instance, people think flat land is the ideal situation. I actually think land with a little bit of slope is the ideal landscape. So getting familiar with your land form and obviously what comes with it in a bigger sense. We're not talking about soil. Soil is very far down this scale because that's easy to change. Very easy to change, actually. But changing the bigger landscape is kind of almost impossible, and we shouldn't do that. We should not move mountains.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
You know, I was incredibly inspired by how Hanyulul of Iwa Forest at Nkurunkuru started his whole succession agroforestry project. So he lived in a tent on the property for a number of months, I don't know how long, which allowed him to just be there, experience, observe, walk around, you know, especially when you walk, you feel where it's going slightly uphill, and you need to be there ideally in all the seasons to feel and to observe where is the cold wind coming from, where, you know, what does the lay of the land, the gradient play, what role does it play in terms of temperature distribution. So I think that's a very, if you get onto a new piece of land, first just really walk this land and get to know the shapes. And if you can draw it, it's great. And obviously it's very useful to have a contour map. Or if you only have a Google Earth image, then you can kind of draw the contours into it. You could even use your GPS to get heights mapped out. So that's a very useful tool to really know the shape. There's also a beautiful, I will say it now, one of my colleagues in Australia who works with Yeoman and you know, all of those principles, he uses the hand to illustrate what a contour is. And imagine water falling onto your hand, and it's a mountainous landscape, or has basically the same runoff as you would have on your hand. So these would be the places where gullies form in between. And if you want to prevent that, you know, where would you find equal heights in terms of, I find that just a very helpful illustration to look at one's hand and then imagine, a landscape works like that. And if I look at this, where's the water going to run if I pour water over it? I'm done. Stefan, are you coming back?
Stefan, ich habe dich gemutet, glaube ich, weil da war so ein Hintergrundgeräusch.
Ah, okay. Now unmute him.
Ich kann das nicht. He needs to unmute himself.
Stefan, unmute yourself, please.
At
Great.
the bottom on
Hello.
the left.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so I can show the hand thing once we take the slide thing away, and then everybody can play around with that a little bit. Yeah, I basically just wanted to say that looking at the... Okay, should I show you now while we're talking about it?
Yeah.
Now I can't see myself because I'm in front of the logo. How do I move myself here behind the logo? Can anybody everybody see this?
Very nice. Yeah. And we can see your
I can't
knife.
see my...
Or what is that?
I can't see my hand. Okay, but you can see it.
Yes.
I can see it.
We see the red line.
Okay, so let me put it like this. Here we have a mountain. This is the whole mountain, yeah, and it's got all these little peaks. And down this mountain, we have these gully or these gorges, yeah, big valleys.
Drainage lines, yeah.
Exactly. And these are the ridges here on the finger. So all the water flows into the gaps between my fingers. So it flows down this way, and it flows from the ridge down into the valley, into the what is the name for it? Gorge.
Drainage, I think drainage channel.
Yeah. But the key point or the key line, the key points in the landscape, and this is something Yeoman talked about as well, and is a really interesting tool as well, is the key line that you can use to kind of see how does where the catchment points within your landscape. So a lot of water will come together at these points, and here you could technically bring the water out onto the ridge. Sorry for my lighting. And bring more moisture to the ridges, which are the driest spots in the landscape. So here's the most moisture, and here's the least moisture. Yeah. So you can use that as a simple tool to look at how the landscape is formed. And if you sit somewhere and observe mountains, doesn't matter where you are, you will always see this kind of thing. You will see these primary valleys or drainage lines, and you will be able to identify these key points in that landscape where most of the water comes together to that point before it then goes down in the drainage line. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the slide so we can carry on there. So the next one, Wiebke, is there anything land you want to ask, or does anybody have a question? Land form, land shape. Okay.
I would just add one thing. I mean, on here it says that this is least or close to least influenced by human activity. But we start to really influence the shape of land through erosion. Erosion channels have really changed landscapes. So we now have deep gullies where they were not 5 years ago. So that's just something to keep in mind. Degradation can actually change the shape of the land. It won't move mountains, but it will create gullies through erosion.
Yeah. And this has a huge implication on the next one down, the water, and the whole hydrology of the landscape. But I think we are actually also at a point where human influence is also changing huge parts of the landscape physically with dams and other mining activities.
Yes.
Okay. I think water is my absolute favorite of all. I think also the most powerful to change our situation and to move us a little bit down on that scale of brittleness towards a better situation. And it's such a fun way to interact with the landscape because it's kind of like being a child, playing with water and how it flows through the landscape or how it collects in the landscape, and knowing that you can really change your situation by doing that. But it's a bigger subject. So water is not just the water that falls on a mountain and runs down the slope, but it's what gives or helps part of what gives us life, and is absolutely crucial for any life. And we should try and understand the bigger water cycles and the smaller water cycles, and how important they are. And then we maybe create more of an interest also to change our water cycle that we are part of within our catchment wherever we live. So a catchment, maybe just quickly for, I hope everybody knows, but a catchment is basically the area that you live in where the water that falls on the ground is feeding the aquifers of that area and the rivers of that area. So it's all the water that flows into often one river system of that specific area. And we can have a huge impact on how these water systems, how well they function, and turning them around, basically from what Wiebke says, when the landscape gets extremely eroded, as we have it almost all over the country, we can really change that in a very short time if we are careful. So maybe just upfront, in the permaculture movement, everybody gets all excited about swales at some point. It's an amazing tool, but please, there are many earthworks that we can use, and swales are a great tool, but if they are put in the wrong place and not built in the right way, they can be extremely detrimental and cause even more loss of soil. So start small, start with the smallest influence that you can have. And there's a beautiful film, kind of a story, called The Upward Spiral, I think, Wiebke?
Yeah, I think so.
This is something that you should watch, because it is very inspiring how you can play with just a few stone pebbles in a waterfall and start to understand how you can manipulate the flow of water. Yeah, so there are many things we talk about. I think the first one is how do we, or the one really important one is how do we bring the water that falls on the landscape into the landscape rather than let it run off and create more destruction. So this is on the bigger landscape. This again, I think, comes back to using livestock and good management of livestock. In a smaller context, you could do some earthworks, but again, there we should have a separate session about earthworks. It's quite a big subject and can be very complex. There's roof runoff, which all of us can use. Yeah, Wiebke, sorry.
Sorry, I think it is easier to understand not how do we bring water into the landscape. You actually mean soil, no? How can it be trapped in the soil? So not held only in dams for irrigation later on, but actually when it falls, to infiltrate into the soil and remain there for as long as possible. And maybe then filter downhill with gravitation underground rather than above ground.
Exactly. I mean, this is something we see all over the world, even in very dry, brittle environments like ours. When you bring this water into your soil and not let it run, you can actually create very moist situations further downhill or even springs. So this is not a myth. This really works in dry climates. So it's exactly as we've said. And there are many ways to do this, but I don't know. You guys have to tell me, but I don't think this is something we need to go too deep in now.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I mean, I know that some people on this group, I don't know whether it's today, I don't know many of you, but you may be sitting on a small holding. And that is on the edge of, sort of part of a peri-urban situation and so on. So sometimes we really need to look beyond our fence lines and see where water enters our property and how we could possibly use that water, runoff from roads, runoff from a neighboring property. Maybe a neighbor has so much bare ground and it comes into our property. I think Grant published a very nice little video when it rained in Swakopmund, and he showed how you can actually harvest the rainwater not only from his that falls on his land, but also the neighbor's land. If we start to see these opportunities, it's really great. And then later on realize that if we help our neighbors to actually cover the soil and let the water infiltrate, and it then enters our property as a spring of clear water rather than muddy runoff, we all win even more. So what I feel is really important, that before we start doing earthworks and changing the landscape shape, is covering the soil. That will bring the biggest bang for the buck. If it's mulched, if it is covered with organic matter, there will be infiltration and there will be water holding capacity, and ultimately some springs will develop. I'm done. Nobody else wants to contribute to this conversation. This is strange.
May I contribute that the mulching is not only dead plant matter. Mulching with live mulch, I think, is even more important than putting something onto the soil. It's putting some live roots into the soil.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that water is. Do you want to add to the water, Stefan?
Yeah, thanks for that, Wiebke. No. I still want to add to it. So maybe just for everybody to understand, when you look at your water situation, especially the rainwater situation, I totally agree with covering the soil. But in some cases, you have steep landscape and already a eroded situation, or like you say, there's water coming off the roads. Roads are just placed so wrong in the landscape, and the scale of permanence can really help us put those roads in the right place. So they can cause severe erosion on your property or further downline. And then organic material will probably not help much. It will just be washed away. So you will have to intervene there somehow. And ideally, you do this as far up in the landscape as possible. If you and you might, this might actually be not on your land. So again, it comes back to having good relationships with your neighbors, and try and make them aware of how important this is. So always start as high as you can and as simple and as small as you can. And also look a little bit into the whole key line design, because you don't want to start with earthworks of any kind above the key line, because it is just too steep, the landscape. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And maybe I think we should have a discussion just on water and harvesting water, and because it's a huge subject, and for us, I think probably the most important. So there are obviously other options. There's grey water, there's roof runoff water, there's a lot of other water. There's municipal water, there's borehole water, there's river water, and all of these are really things that we need to look closer at and be aware of their limitations. And I don't know if are we going to go into that a little bit?
Sure, I think that would be, maybe it takes too much time from the bigger
No,
context.
I agree. Okay, so we go down the scale.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next point on this scale? I'm not too familiar
The invisible
with,
structures, the social.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah, you want to talk about that, Wiebke?
Yeah, I could. I found it fascinating that Yeomans put this so high. But when you think about it, it's really so true. Our belief systems, our deeply held beliefs and our habits and our organizational structures are so powerful in determining what we can do and how we do it. So I think that is something that many people forget. One person is very enthusiastic and they have seen a couple of YouTubes, they've read a book or two, they've had conversations, and they've went to a conference or whatever, and they want to come home and do something. And they don't take their whole household, family, labor force, whatever the constellation is with them. And they don't take into account their own economic situation. Or, they're so enthusiastic. I mean, I know that my dear brother is on this call as well. We know what our parents did, borrowing money to develop infrastructure. And it actually was in the wrong place. And it was not designed very well. And it was quite a financial disaster. So if we don't take into account really all these factors of, do we have the support? Do we have the genuine, authentic, moral support from our team, whatever that team is, whether it's a household or whether it's a workforce or whether it's a corporation? We need to look at that. What culture do we have there? What belief systems are very strong? And do we actually have similar outlooks on the world? Do we look at the whole resource space in a way that we interpret it in the same way? I see an opportunity where another person sees waste and a problem. So all of this, I think, needs to be really taken care of and considered. When people ask questions, for example, on our WhatsApp group, and they want to have suggestions, I need to know, can you borrow money? Do you have your own capital? These things play a big role as to what I would share with you in terms of what I think might be appropriate. So when we also advise each other, I think we need to be very considerate of that we don't know everything about the other person's context. And if we just, we fire our enthusiasm without checking on these social underlying, very often unspoken cultural norms and values and our finances, then it could create a problem. And we invest in places where we don't have the kind of results that we all desire. Do you want to add something, Stefan, or anybody else?
I would like to add just a very short story that explains or that brings this to life. There's a story of the husband. This is a township scenario where the husband learned about permaculture and he started planting and mulching, and everything was like really deep mulched in his yard. And and he had the support of his wife. But then he was away for some weeks, and when he came back, the whole yard was cleaned. The mulch was gone, everything was gone. And it was not because the wife wasn't supportive, it was because everybody around her, there was a cultural belief that she couldn't keep a clean house. Because what you do in the tradition is you clean your yard and you sweep everywhere and you sweep every day. So she was under pressure from the cultural situation that it looked like she couldn't keep a clean house. And that made the permaculture project stop. So it's really relevant that this social context is so high on this list.
Yeah. And again, I feel just talking about it is not enough to garner the support. It really helps to do something small, playful, a safe to fail trial, just to say, can we try this? If it doesn't work for us, we can change it, we can stop it. But to actually do something that is visible without being too visible, too much out into the face of the public. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just to, I don't know if I'd actually want to add anything there. I think it's like you said, it's something that might be sensitive or difficult for us to do because we don't really share so much in our community, I feel, anymore, and especially things that when we don't understand what the neighbor is doing, then we criticize it instead of asking, why are you doing this? What's the purpose of this? Get into conversation and try and understand it. And there must be a reason why the person is doing. That's a huge one. It's a massive one. And it would be lovely if we make an effort to really not just play with the sexy things, the water and the soil and the plants, but with what makes us human, the social structure. I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'm the worst, or not the worst, I'm not the most capable to bring people together in that sense. But I'll gladly join in.
What definitely helps is that we have samples that people can visit and view. That's probably the easiest to convince people to try something new.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. And that's why what Wiebke said is so important. Start playing somewhere in a small, safe place, if you want. So you really feel you can play instead of maybe doing it bigger and then you adjust it because of the funny looks you get from outside. And then share.
Yeah. Good. Let's move to roads and access.
Roads and access. Yeah, I just mentioned it. The water kind of shows us very often how wrong our roads are positioned within the landscape. So if we can place our roads in the right way and access to our any place we really need to access with machinery or by foot, doesn't matter. It becomes also part of the infrastructure that is fixing our landscape, because we can combine water harvesting and roads beautifully together. But that's and that will save us a lot of money if we design our roads and access pathways according to the landscape form, instead of constantly having to fix roads. And there are many examples. I used to live on the outskirts of a farm which road is severely eroded every year during the rainy season, and it's I think it would have saved them a lot of money and effort a long time ago if they would have just adjusted it according to the landscape. You might drive a little bit further, but compared to the effort of fixing and maintaining those pathways, it's well worth the extra mile.
And on that is also, usually roads and fences are linked and so on and so on. The maintenance costs are so much less, and animals walk differently, and the erosion works very differently because animals like walking along a fence. So it's really worthwhile looking into that. We can't discuss all the details here. I mean, that would be 3 days to how to design proper infrastructure for which purpose, but just as a principle.
Yeah, and one very fun exercise anybody could do right away is take a Google image of your farm, your plot, your house, and then just draw in with different colors. Maybe when you go from your kitchen to the chicken coop, and you write down how many times a day you walk there, and you make another color, or and where you're going to the garden, for instance, and you draw out all your pathways that you are actually walking or driving. And it kind of gives you an idea of how much time, first of all, you spend between these different things. But also, it often shows you that, oh, I could merge these two pathways, halfway at least, and then it could split somewhere. And it creates more growing space for something else. Or it kind of shows you very visually where you are moving and maybe how you could adjust this, especially when it comes to the contour of the landscape. It's a really fun exercise. Yeah. Good. So we jump to the next, because we don't just want to talk about the scale of permanence, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just start with vegetation, because this kind of links to land shape again, and is really helpful tool to identify your landscape form as well. In many parts of the country, especially where we have a little bit more vegetation, so the central parts of the country, especially the mountainous areas, you can see a distinct difference between vegetation according to the elevation. So it's very easy to very quickly identify your frost pockets, as we call them. So the frost falls down the landscape with like water, moves just like water. And so you have these very different vegetation plants at different elevations. And the same goes for moisture. And the same goes for rocky soil or deep sandy soil. So trees become extremely tall in very sandy, deep soils, and they become shorter, the same tree, on a more rocky soil or subsoil. And so you can read the vegetation, and it gives you an enormous amount of information on your landscape as a whole. But also, I think it's really worthwhile to understand your vegetation in the sense of what function do these specific or these different plants in your area actually have? What role do they play? Are they short-lived, longer-lived? Are they food for any wildlife or livestock? I think there's an enormous amount of plants growing in the country which we could incorporate into our feed bank for our livestock, and it's totally overlooked. Yeah, I think wildlife we need to look in. I think the most important for me and for most people who want to grow some food is how do I kind of control, manage the wildlife in my area, that it doesn't become too detrimental to my activity. So understanding the wildlife's behavior and patterns can help a lot there. And also there, I think it would be nice to hear more about interesting attempts to keep some of them out of our gardens and our fields, other than just killing it. I think we're still too often shooting a baboon or shooting a leopard because we just don't understand how else we could maybe work with these animals.
I think what's also important there is that one needs to consider unintended consequences. So if you take some species out of the landscape, then what does that influence the other species? And that might actually be a negative consequence for you rather than positive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, a little thing that I like to say from my vantage point here as a commercial farmer amongst others. I basically always tell them, if you're willing to give 10% to your church, be willing to give 10% to his creation. And that really seems to work wonders with certain aspects where people want to go for 100% offtake, 100% harvest. It really holds the mirror in front of certain people.
Yeah, and then also to recognize the potential, like if we are not talking about predators in the wild Serengeti kind of situation where we have plains game, which is most similar to our livestock. The plains, the predators, the pack hunting predators, the packs of lion and packs of cheetah and so on, they kept the herd together and moving in a tighter bunch, which fertilized the soil, and the tilling of the soil happened far more effectively than when animals are spread out. So if you don't have any predators, you tend to have animals walking off in long trails, and you don't have the animal impact of the hooves tilling the soil. And in terms of livestock management, that is one thing to consider. I think one big challenge is, what positive can we see in all the baboons that seem to invade our gardens now? I think baboons have become a real challenge, and the birds in the crop fields, especially in the north. People are so scared of those flocks of quellias destroying crop fields. So this is where creativity is really needed, and we need to tell our students that here's a nice challenge for a PhD, for a master's, for anything. Come up with something that is environmentally friendly and aids biodiversity.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this comes also back to what Imo just said. The baboon pressure that we have is probably because of the lack of predators that keep them kind of in check, partly at least. And yeah, I so agree. I think it would be such a fun project to come up with weird ideas that could scare them away from the gardens. I always think of making these huge masks that turn in the wind and different faces on either side, so it doesn't stay the same. I think there would be a great project. The same as the elephants or any of the really severe wildlife that has enormous impact on our fields and birds, fields and gardens. Yeah, but there's also potential. There's a lot of wildlife that we are not maybe utilizing. I always think of something like pigeons. I mean, yes, we would domesticate them, but just a quick example, it could be something that goes out and feeds itself and comes back and you harvest it. So also being a bit more experimental and looking at all the animal world that we have here, the amazing wildlife we have here, and how one could maybe make use of some of them that we are not using.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If you basically need to make lemonade out of lemons. Even if the wildlife is sometimes interfering with your plans, maybe a healthy dose of tourism, where you basically have people paying to help you, earn some income on whatever. Suddenly that cute baboon or the annoying birds, they become something that is of very big interest to somebody wanting to pay to stay on your land, and turn it around into something useful.
Yeah, I'm very curious what will happen after the last good rainy season, whether we're gonna have potentially another locust plague. And the last time the locusts were all over, I was so challenged and I went onto the internet and I mean, reading the reports from other parts in Africa, how they harvest locusts and sell them for a prime price in the urban markets as protein, high value protein. Like people here eat mopani worms, people would eat locusts there. And so that is labor, and with shade cloth, people would just catch all these huge swarms of locusts and eat them. But if you do that, if they have been poisoned, obviously that goes into your food chain, and that's not a very good idea. So we need to really raise awareness around how there are options to see things either as a problem or as a potential protein source.
Yeah, talking of the mopani worms, and technically, from a farmer's perspective, it would be considered a pest. But for others, it's a delicacy to such a degree where there's now actually efforts to protect this species of moth. I believe it's a moth, isn't it? Or is it a bug? But in any case, it really the future of the species is much in danger to a degree.
Sure. Because of all the collection.
Correct. People overharvest the mopani worms, and there's really not enough anymore as there used to be. As the urban population grows and people collect them and dry them or freeze them or preserve them, it definitely has an impact on the population.
Yeah.
So maybe there's the chance to then harvest something else, and maybe we need to adjust our palate. I mean, the grasshopper has a shrimpy flavor, so whoever likes shrimps will probably like grasshoppers. So just a
crusted in chocolate.
Yeah, or in sauté sauce.
I'm thinking of all the pollinators. Would they be wildlife?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, we don't have insects on the scale, so I would definitely put it in there, I guess. Yeah, why not? And it's a very good point, Jürgen. We really need to help our little insect friends. Obviously, there are also other pollinators, bats and birds, and they're probably also not doing too well if we are not helping them.
The link to the invisible structures in this one would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is like if you want people to start eating grasshoppers, as that's a huge job. And I think the awareness of the importance of insects or in every single living organism, and this needs to start in the schools, right there. And I think this is a big one. It's a huge one. Yes.
Okay, let's move on to microclimate.
Yeah. Should I start? Okay, microclimate. Again, this very much refers back to the extreme, dry, brittle conditions that we find ourselves in here in Namibia. So creating microclimate or increasing a local microclimate is should be high on our list. This is something that can be influenced fairly easily over a little bit of time. And it's something we should all do. You can go about it fairly quickly by building a wall or a shade net structure or a reed fence or something. But longer term, ideally, it's something we should be doing with plants and plant material. So stopping evaporation, which is enormous in Namibia. We have extreme high evaporation, sometimes or in many parts of the country higher than our precipitation. And this is because of dry winds, more or less throughout the year, and intense sunshine. And we need more shade, wind shade and sunshade. And this will then hold more moisture and bring our temperatures down. Yeah, so the easiest I always think is to start wherever it is already a bit moist and shady and work your way out from there, rather than trying to protect a huge area. That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a very, I hope most people have looked into microclimate and the importance of it. Can be part of, changing your situation drastically by looking at microclimate.
And maybe, Stefan, something that we could mention here, just to say that probably the drier the conditions are, the more brittle the conditions are, we may have to defer the planting of our so-called target species, the species that we want to harvest for our own food, by a year or two, so that those plants have a better starting point. So if we first really just focus on the plants that grow fast, that create shade, that create frost cover, that create air conditioning, basically
ground cover
for those ground cover and biomass for those high value target plants, so that we are prepared to look at the succession of our planting. So we may need to defer by a year or two or even 3 that if we can afford that, that's really great. And if we can't afford it on all our land, that's where the agroforestry setup design can be so useful, that we have tree lines and they create the kind of wind and sun barriers, and in between we can plant our usual crops. And we may not have such high yields in the first years because they don't have those optimal protection conditions, but over time, through nurturing those tree lines, we actually create the microclimate that can bring bigger yields and more sustainable yields.
Yeah, and I also think again, our livestock management comes in here in the bigger landscape. If you have bare ground, your temperatures in general will be much higher. So there again, managing your livestock on the larger areas is so crucial to change that microclimate. And then maybe just to add to this, if you are planting a tree, like you said, a target tree, something of higher value, you can always think of a number of plants you can grow with it that creates a kind of mini microclimate for this plant, and that will change the way this plant will grow. So that's something I do, for instance. I do often, if I have to plant a single tree, fruit tree or something, because that's how it has to be in that situation, I will add other plants to it, a faster growing, at least one faster growing plant that will be its kind of umbrella, and then something bushy and shrubby that will protect it from around, from the sides. So you do create a mini microclimate, and then obviously covering your soil, ideally by a living plant, living mulch. If not, then at least with material to keep those soil temperatures low.
Okay. Should we go to buildings and infrastructure? Time is moving on.
Yes, let's go. Buildings and infrastructure. So placing of these buildings, any kind of infrastructure into your landscape, again, will be informed by the process that we have come this far. So the roads and the water, the land shape, and even the climate will very much inform how we build and where we build. We can actually, it's also a subject that is very dear to me, and I'm always so disappointed how few houses in Namibia are actually cool in summer and warm in winter, and it is fairly easy in our conditions to have that situation. If one just looks a little bit more into what is necessary to do that. And it doesn't mean you have to rebuild. You can transform an existing house to become a very comfortable environment without air conditioning and without massive heating energy costs. And infrastructure in a bigger sense, I think it kind of goes along the same lines as fences and roads, by cleverly placing them and choosing them, and we can save a lot of money down the line, or hassle fixing things. Yeah. Don't know if we want to go deep into the subject. I think if one has an interest to have a comfortable home, there's plenty of information out there how to make your home a passively cooled or passively warmed house, and well, most houses are actually able to change. It's obviously an investment, but I think it's worth looking into it.
Yeah.
Maybe just a quick addition here, something very simple. If you do want to grow more trees in your yard or around your buildings, there are evergreen trees and there are deciduous trees, meaning they either keep their leaves throughout the year or they disperse of the leaves in the winter time. You can make use of this by placing them around your buildings so that in winter your building gets warmed up by the sunshine, and in summer you are covered by shade. And this can have an enormous impact on your well-being in and around your house.
I'd like to add something to infrastructure. Infrastructure can also include equipment, not so. So, what kind of tools and equipment am I using to work what size of operation, what size of garden or field or planting or whatever you want to, call that operation. And I think that again links so much with the invisible structures. What kind of value you bring towards a machine and what kind of value you bring, an attachment you bring to a hand tool, and to be really open there. And I find that really valuable. If you do want to have a commercially viable business and operation and you want to share produce and so on, how much can you sustain with your existing labor force? So labor is not actually a part of this, which I find fascinating because it's so critical. I don't know actually where Yeoman puts this in, Stefan. Because what I'm able to achieve is so dependent on how much labor I have and how much I can be there present with my body and do things and observe things and make decisions. So the more exhausted I am, the less clear and open-minded I will be, perhaps. So I think that's something really important. And I thought I mention it now because sometimes we may find that if we don't have dedicated labor, it's quite useful to have a small machine to help us do a job more efficiently. But on the other hand, if we look around us and we find we do have labor force, and we do have hand tools that are economically suitable for those bodies, then maybe we should do that. And I think there's a huge opportunity now that we see we need different hand tools. And that's a whole industry and a whole manufacturing industry, maybe in Namibia, that is still to develop. But the potential is really quite big. Our tools are not kind to bodies to do hard labor in difficult soil and climate. So I think that's a huge space for how we can become creative.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would almost say that labor maybe partly should be within the invisible structures, because it's us, it's humans, and it's difficult to adjust. But I think it should also somehow be further down, because there is just flexibility and space to shape. So again, maybe also coming back to the younger generation, the children, and how these new ideas, not just new tools, but new ways of, or other ways of doing things. If we want to talk about agriculture, different ways, being more regenerative in our approach needs to start there as well. Yeah, I agree with there's huge potential for developing skill and tools to be used on the smaller farms in the country, for sure. Plenty. Yeah, great. Next one. Zones of
Use.
use. Oh, it slipped down
Zones.
into the next one.
Yeah.
The zones of use. Yeah. So this is this you got from the permaculture zoning, right? Because Yeomans really have this in his scale. Wiebke?
Yeah, no, it's Yeomans. It was in there. That's the one that you gave me.
The zones of use. Okay. Okay. We'll quickly talk about it. I think everybody on this group, or not everybody, but I hope everybody in this chat at least has had a look into zoning. Another useful tool to show, yeah, to help us place things in the landscape according to how much we interact with it. So the things as close to you that need most of your attention, and put the things further away that need less of your attention. And maybe an example would be if you are partly feeding yourself from a kitchen garden, a vegetable garden, you're probably going to harvest some or other product there every day to make a meal, and that means you go there frequently, so you don't want this to be on the other side of the hill. You want this to be as close to the kitchen as possible. And things that you don't need to visit that often can then be a little bit further away. Yeah, so the zoning goes more or less according to your attention, your, what do you call it? Not attention, your frequency of visit, of, yeah, of Aufmerksamkeit. What is that? I can't find the English word there.
Attention.
Yeah, yeah. So the zoning can, or is very often influenced very much by again what we have gone through before. So your infrastructure, your roads, the landscape form will all have an impact on how you kind of lay out these zones. So they will be very different with every single place. And sometimes you will maybe leave out one zone, or you only have 2 or 3 zones. You don't necessarily have to always have the 5 zones as they classically talk about in the permaculture books. Anybody want to add something there, or questions?
No.
Okay. Now we get down to number 2, soil fertility and management. Maybe just, I'll just quickly start with that one. I think what is really important to understand is that we can create soil very easily and fairly quickly as well. And people are very often very kind of in the dark when it comes to soils, I find. They want to do soil tests, and they think the soil is the deciding factor. It is in a way, but I would like you to not feel so pressured in having the perfect soil, but rather say, I will create good soil, and I will take my time doing so, and rather understand what is good soil and what do I need to do to really have a good soil. So I think a soil that is full of life.
Okay, right. Thanks.
Hello. A soil that is very much alive is something we should strive for, and there are a few soil scientists that can maybe explain in more detail what that means. So it would be really worthwhile if you don't know so much about the soil food web and the life in the soil yet, to have a look into that. It is a fascinating world. And soil fertility, yeah, it basically is a process, and so this needs plants. This needs sunshine, photosynthesis through the plants. That's where it starts, and then it goes down the stem of the plant and into the soil, and this is where the magic happens. There's a huge interaction between all the organisms that are part of the soil, and we still only understand a very small part of it, but what we see already now is just absolutely beautiful, and shows us how interactive and how much communication is taking place to try and support each other. And once we understand these processes, then it becomes much easier to understand why our plants are struggling, or why we have pest problems and so on. So yeah, and that comes then obviously once we understand what we need to do, then we we know what we need to do. So in the sense of management, there are many ways to go about it. I used to make a lot of compost, and I am more inclined now to do that directly in my beds. So creating fertility and managing my plants, cutting, pruning, harvesting, that all becomes a process within the garden beds. Now I don't remove anything from my garden, even pest and disease-ridden plants, because I think they should be part of that information cycle within the garden itself. And generally management, and I'm thinking of a not just a vegetable garden, I'm talking about having all kinds of plants growing in the same system. I rely more on observation and making plans on what needs to happen, rather than looking at the calendar or at what day of the week it is. So the garden tells me when to do what, basically. Yeah, but there are many ways to do it, and if you only produce a few vegetables, then yeah, it's probably a bit more difficult to create a self-regulating system. Whereas when you have a bigger garden that has perennials and annuals and everything all together, then it becomes easier over time to create a self-regulating system.
Stefan, can I add here? I mean, not that I can have any evidence how much I harvested, and I certainly have very erratic harvests and production. But in my 2 little wicking beds, which are 2 square meters each, I witnessed the same principles. One can integrate into one vegetable bed some perennials and the diversity, and deal with weeds in a very different way. I think it's well worthwhile mentioning here that is really the big shift from the conventional organic production, where most of the fertility and soil fertility management came from mulching. Yeah, from mulching compost as well, but from good compost making. We are now turning, the permaculture, syntropic, successional agroforestry approach really focuses on this composting in situ. And it's a cold composting process. And I mean, we've all learned that we need hot compost to kill disease and to kill weed seeds and so on and so on. But it's really interesting, the experience that many of us are making, that if you're patient enough, the biodiversity gets so big that even with the cold composting process, plant communities become pretty resilient and highly productive. So the strategic pruning and the dense plantings of very diverse plants and annuals and perennials together, and being prepared to let some plants die. If they don't want to do it this time, next time, maybe they are ready.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. So I totally agree. I think it is possible to have a polyculture of perennials and annuals within the same space. Doesn't matter how small the space is. And the bigger the systems become, I think that is the way to go anyways. I don't think it should be purely vegetables. There should always be perennials within those systems as well, for many, many reasons. I just see with my space now how the previous 2 months have been already extremely hot, and just building, having a little bit of microclimate created by perennial plants within that system changes the dynamics completely. And that's just one part of it.
But I do want to add something here. Management and labor is a different quality than we know from conventional plantings and crop management. We need more intelligent actions. So it requires observations, and I think it's a challenge that we must all take into account when we look at our resource base, when we look at our context. Do we have the kind of persons working with us that are interested in observing and having to make decisions and not just follow an instruction? I think it's a big challenge, but it's also a hugely exciting one. And I think it can be a very empowering, mutually empowering experience, that we are now saying, you don't just follow my instructions. You actually have to make a choice every time. Where do you cut? Where do you prune? Where do you put the waste that you cut off? Not just in a wheelbarrow and cart it away on a big heap, but where do you place it and why do you place it there? So I think if we start a production system like this, we all must be a little bit prepared to become coaches or to become mentors and be a bit excited about helping other people see the whys behind the whats. So that's a very important part that is part of the success story. I think if you're not prepared to do that, you will struggle. I'm done.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I think it is we might have to be mentors, or we will have to be, but we also have to learn a lot.
Absolutely.
Meaning we need to be very willing to make a lot of mistakes along the way and reflect on those and build on that and share this. So yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't agree more with that. We need to have people that are flexible or willing enough to go on a new journey as co-workers and employees, because it's a very different way of working with plants. It's an interactive work. Yeah, totally. So we drifted a little bit away from. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I just I want to drift further away maybe, but the link to invisible structures again comes to mind here. If we what are our values that we propagate, not only looking at soil and so on, but looking at the social aspect of what we're doing. So that's why I see the link to the invisible structures for management.
Yeah.
I fully agree that this is a crucial part of success. Is, are we prepared to disciple people, not only teach them and train them and accept that they'll put into practice what they have heard and what they've understood, but rather take them by the hand and say, let's go do this together, and make sure that they can make it their own and then apply it and continuously apply it. And these must be this applies to people that we employ or that in another way work with us.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going on to the last point, or no, Victor, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good lead to the last point, because
what
do we want to experience as we do our work, you know, as we create
exactly.
and as we,
Yeah, I think the last point, like you said, it can be an amazing experience, and it should be. And I think working with plants in a more creative way always leads to a very appealing situation. Yeah, I'm enjoying this journey, and I'm sure that most people that would dive into putting all these little things together and trying to understand, you know, all these elements, they interact with each other, is a big game. It's a huge game where we can play and have fun and experience it and express ourselves, and then something beautiful comes out of it.
yeah. Stefan, anything else about context?
Well, I think you know, when one looks at, you know, your situation and you want to do something, and like I said earlier, you know, you always want to go out there and plant something, or you want to go out there and build a chicken coop, or, you know, we want to move forward. And I think maybe it's with me, but I think it's in general it is like that, and it feels like we need to do that so we get moving, so we move forward. But we will make so many mistakes just going out there and doing something if we don't really understand what our situation is. So it is extremely crucial to go through this with time and focus and involve anybody who's part of your situation to really get a good understanding of your situation. It is so worth it. And you will make well, you will make mistakes for sure, but maybe some smaller ones rather than bigger ones.
Yeah, I want to add to this. You know, I keep on being inspired by Gabe Brown, who wrote this book, from dirt to soil, who's basically considered the father of the regenerative movement. Who said if you want to see some change, you do things differently, or you do different things. So you change a technology, you change a production method. But if you want to see big change, you look at your world differently. You see it differently. And I think this is what we wanted to bring across as well by this focus on the context. Really look at what you have rather than immediately being invested in the doing. Be invested in the observation and learn from what you see, and then document what you see, and document your dreams, and document the possibilities, and see how they change by you looking at the same scenario a couple of months later in a different climate, in a different season. And you might add to the same thing, you might scrap your original idea. So taking the time to say, to observe, I think is really important. Emil, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say on this, I tend to learn to observe by making mistakes. So just going out there and sitting there and observing tells me nothing. I need to do, I don't know what I'm looking at because I have no experience. And all the books doesn't help. You actually physically have to get out, get your hands dirty, try 50 things, and 49 will fail. And then slowly but surely you start to see what you're supposed to look at. So it does take time and it does take work.
No, definitely. And I like this sort of saying, to do a safe to fail trial. So do it in a small scale so that when it is a flop, it doesn't cost you too much. The risk of the failure is not too big. It won't break your back. Yeah. But, you know, I absolutely agree with you that it is worthwhile getting your hands dirty, but maybe not start with structures that are too long term. You know, do small things that can be taken away again without you being so invested in them that you that you feel it's a waste.
I like to find an analogy with the way SpaceX builds their rockets versus the rest of the space industry. The rest of the space industry pours billions into building one rocket and tries to make it perfect. And SpaceX doesn't. They start building a tank and then they fly the tank and then it falls over and it explodes and then they try again and they build another one and that's a bit better. So try and iterate and try more and iterate more and try more and iterate more, but every time don't break the bank. But you'll be much faster with results.
Yeah, especially if you reflect on what happens. I think that's crucial. Maybe just to give you a bit of a different perspective, when I've always been fascinated by designing things and shaping things. That's something I'm passionate about. And when I got into the whole world of permaculture, I thought, you know, if somebody comes to me and says, "Can you help me design my space?" I would go there and then I would, you know, have a blank canvas and I'll design something nice for them. But the deeper I got into all of this, especially through the design process that that we have here, the scale of permanence, and also what Mollison and Holmgren kind of put together, and others have added to, you end up realizing all you're doing is you are making an intense assessment and you putting all that information. So it's really, like Luca said, important to document, and you put all that information into layers, and you don't design anything. It's the landscape and your situation, all the things that you've assessed that will tell you what you are doing. So it's actually really easy because you don't need to sit there and think, okay, so what do I need to do? Once you do your assessment properly, there is a pathway right there in front of you, more or less, that tells you what you should do. And that doesn't mean that the situation might not change down the line, but for now, it kind of tells you what's possible and what is not.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. Maybe any general questions on, maybe something wasn't clear in terms of any of the things we talked about.
No, from my side, happiness. Very well rounded.
The group was very quiet, very different to what you wanted, Stefan.
I think it's a lot to absorb, because you're constantly putting yourself in your own situation, and then you start thinking about a lot of things, and you sort of like see what you've been missing all the time.
Or maybe what you have been thinking of. Maybe people were just happy that they got confirmation, no?
Or that.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, again, it might be easier to go through. Hello, sorry. Jürgen?
So I just find it valuable, and I'll take this with me, is interaction.